So what this did is it kicked off a very quick romance. Hughes and Plath were married 4 months after meeting. So Plath is a whole figure that we obviously could do an entire episode on. We don't have time to do. But I think a lot of people kind of know her story, right? Like
I've heard of Sylvia Plath, and I think I know that she died, right?
Yeah.
Like young?
Famously killed herself.
Oh, okay, that's what it was.
Welcome, friends, to episode 338 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss Ted Hughes' 1968 children's book and Brad Bird's 1999 film, The Iron Giant. So, James, this is one that has been on our list for a long time. It's a movie that I feel like I knew the plot of, despite never having seen. Even after watching it, I think that was mostly true. Like, sure, there were little things that happened, like a lot of the details I didn't know. But I just heard this movie talked about so much in so many ways that I felt like I really kind of understood what it was about. That didn't mean I didn't find a lot to connect with and enjoy here, because I really do, because I love this kind of subject matter we'll get into. But we also knew that this was an adaptation, and it was off this book, which is actually called The Iron Man. I know I called it The Iron Giant here, but that's because that's what it was changed to when they released it in the US. This Ted Hughes book, I had heard it was kind of loosely based on, but I'd never read it. And so I actually read this first, because the way we do things. So I read this story first, and then I went into the movie. So I was kind of thinking, like, is this movie going to be more like this book? Because this book is not what I was expecting, because it's quite different. So we got a lot to unpack here. Ted Hughes is a figure that I will just be able to scratch the surface of, because he's actually a very notable figure in poetry. So we'll get into that. There's a lot to unpack here, but yeah, what did you think of The Iron Giant, and are you excited to finally be covering this one?
Yeah, I am, actually. This was, I mean, possibly one of my favorite animated movies growing up. Like, it hit really squarely for me. And I loved seeing, like, as the years went on, that more and more people found it, more and more people, like, kind of found the things to be applauded in it. Because, I don't know if you know this, but it was a box office failure.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that's something that'll be interesting to talk about and track, because then Brad Bird, the director here, goes on to be one of the most notable animated film directors for a while, and created some amazing stuff for Pixar. And like, to see where he was beginning here with this is his feature film directorial debut. And yeah, just in general, this was in my list of, I would say, like, top 10 animated films for quite some time. And looking around just to get people excited for it, I saw Roger Ebert speaking about the film, and it made a lot of sense to me. This is it's an animated film. This is in 1999, when people are typically thinking of animated films as kids' films. And while you could think that maybe it skews a little younger, just as like the perfect demo, I think there's a lot to like about it. But there's no songs in this film. It's not a musical. It's an animated film. Someone like Roger Ebert, I was reading, was comparing it to Hayao Miyazaki's work, with the use of character and musical score to emphasize the world.
Honestly, and a lot of the themes too feel Miyazaki-ish.
Exactly. A lot of anti-war things that we can talk about. But yeah, in general, super ecstatic to cover this story, and specifically Iron Giant. I'm a massive fan of animation, and I think this rightly came at a time when animation, superhero films weren't what they are now, and there's like a sort of strong superhero motif that's in here. And then like 1950s kind of War of the Worlds aesthetic. There's so much cool stuff that's baked into this, so can't wait to talk about that. But we're going to kind of split this up into two different coverages within this one episode here to talk about the book. I'd never read this before, and I had seen the film. I didn't know what to expect. The beginning, there's this scene where the Iron Giant, or the Iron Man in this book, has completely fallen apart and then like pulls himself back together. And I was like, oh shit, that's in the movie. And I thought it's such a fun, like, really cool scene to see that he pulled from that original source. Yeah,
and there are a few things like that are definitely there, and you can see why this is the source. Especially in the back, like, half of the book is just completely different than what happens in the movie. Yeah, we had just a different experience reading it, though, because I didn't have a lot of that background. So I didn't connect with any of that to know that it is something that's in the movie. I just wanted to hear at the start, before we get into it, because like you said, we're going to divide this into roughly 2 parts, probably a shorter part here on the book and then a little bit lengthier on the movie. Broadly, both of these stories, as you already touched on, are anti-war, but I think they're also early, I mean, because it's 68, so when he writes this, but the movie comes out in 99. We're also talking a lot about a being who has like sort of unknown humanity, who is seemingly like a manifestation of a technology. You could call it AI. It's unclear whether or not this is actually AI or more of just like an alien who's made it out of iron. But I think you could equate this with like robots, right? Or AI. And the question becomes a lot about like determination and like if you were built to be a weapon in your sort of essence is that you are a weapon, are you able to go against that and try and resist that and say, I'm not actually this, I want to be something different. And this is a classic theme and trope, I guess you could say, in sci-fi that is one that I'm particularly fond of. My story that came out in Reckoning, What Good Is a Sad Backhoe, is about a giant digging machine trying to find a new purpose for its life beyond just doing this sort of one task that it was designed to do. And so I was finding like parallels there, and it's funny because I'd never even seen this or read it, but I was finding parallels. And then I was also thinking about this exciting new show which we're going to cover, we decided, called Murderbot. And if you don't know anything about Murderbot, but you like Iron Giant, you should absolutely be excited about Murderbot. It is going to be right up your alley as far as like these kinds of themes are very prevalent and explored in a very different way, of course, but we'll be returning to those as we go forward, I think.
Yeah, I thought you were going to compare it to Mickey 17 for a second, Mickey 17, which is
our
next project.
Yeah.
So
I don't think there's any Iron Giant stuff in there, but we'll see.
I was like, wow, interesting. There is a lot of Iron Giant stuff throughout popular media at this point, though. And something else we covered, Ready Player One.
Yeah, Ready Player One.
Heavily features the Iron Giant at one point, actually.
Yeah. In the movie version, the Iron Giant like shows up in the fight. And I saw some interesting like criticism of that scene.
Yes.
And I think it makes more sense now that I've actually watched the movie, why people weren't liking the way that was used. Just
to say it a little bit, like the idea that he was very violent in that film, and like the point of this film eventually.
Yeah, he was like the badass, like the big bruiser, like kind of goes against the whole point of the movie. Anyway, so much to unpack here, though. The story. Let's just kind of give our general thoughts and general reaction to it. I want to go ahead and say that like I enjoyed reading this. It's written in a way that I found to be a bit overly wordy and a little bit ponderous at times. I was shocked to discover, because I went down this whole rabbit hole researching the author, that he was a poet. And poets are particularly known for their use of language. So I think it's safe to say that like the way it was written was very deliberate. I think that he tried to write it in a way that would be approachable for children, because it was very aimed at a certain demo. And I think it is successful in that, but I found that it was a little... I don't know, like I was writing down these like lines that were just strange to me. It was like suddenly he felt a strange feeling. He felt he was being watched. He felt afraid. And as you can tell, like using the word felt a lot there, but also just like that's kind of a thing we don't really love in fiction, where you're sort of filtering your language in a way that is unnecessary and not immediate. But I can recognize that this was probably all done stylistically on purpose by the author, to create a certain sort of rhythm to the language that he must have been fond of. I just didn't find that it particularly worked for me. So I was a little mixed on that. And then the overall story is much more of a fairy tale by design. And it feels larger than life and a little silly to some extent. And in that way, it didn't land as solid with me as I would have hoped something like this would have. I don't know. How did you feel about that? Because this is very different than the movie.
I don't know. I didn't push back really that hard at it being more whimsical and almost fantasy at times. I thought that it felt very like British. Maybe some of that pastoral stuff that comes in with the farm.
Keeps comparing stuff to the size of lorries, so that always signals British to me.
For sure. I felt like it was almost in a different vein than the film that we eventually get.
Yeah.
It feels, I'm trying to think of a comparison of a children's story that we covered that's like in this same voice, or at least in this kind of tone.
Maybe like a Roald Dahl or something?
Yeah, I think Roald Dahl is a basically exactly where I would place this. I don't know that I would compare it to quite the whimsy of a Roald Dahl story.
Yeah.
But it did evoke some of that, and like the journey that we go on through the story eventually leads to this like battle between this Iron Man and this like space entity god spirit
bat
thing.
Dragon angel, I think is what it's called, or space angel dragon god. I don't know, something crazy. It's like a wild name.
Has these like abilities to sing that like create peace. And again, I like that, like that was the element. And so the kind of the subtext of the story though is that like maybe this creature, this Iron Man, has come about because society is like humanity is always at odds with each other, and like that's kind of what draws this monster as well that they eventually do battle with.
Yeah.
And it's really through like the eyes of a child that this Iron Man sees humanity for the good that it has as well as the bad.
Yeah.
And tries to like be a champion for that.
Yeah, and it's got a classic fairy tale structure. It's basically this contest of strength is proposed between the Iron Man, and it's really more about the Iron Man being clever, because this literally the bat dragon angel, whatever, literally the space bat dragon angel
and it's called that. He's not just like,
no, I'm not just making that up. That's what it's called. Comes down and lands on Earth, and it's so big that it like lays across all of Australia with its like head dipped in the water, and there's like, it's playing with some fun like size things, like it's able to just kind of like splash around in the oceans as if it's like a pool, right? It's that big. And it wants to like eat all life on Earth. Basically, it's like, come feed me. And they have to like save the world. And the Iron Man proposes a contest of strength. And the Iron Man is roughly the same size he is in the movie. So big, but not, continent sized. And proposes this test of strength, when it ends up playing out through this like this heating mechanic where he's like, I'm going to lay on all these like this like fire, and I'm going to heat up, and then you have to
oil fire.
Yeah. And you have to go to the sun and like, because that's an equal size fire for you, which doesn't really make sense. But regardless, it's a fairy tale. So the dragon, I'm just gonna call it the dragon, agrees.
That's how I imagined it as well.
Yeah, okay. It was mostly
an angel dragon.
Yeah. Agrees to do this and kind of goes back and forth, and yeah.
And he does like kind of start melting the Iron Man, but he ultimately like outsmarts this thing because the sun is so much hotter.
Yeah. Well, and he's not organic in the same way that this thing is, right? It has scales. It's somewhat organic, and he, I think recognizes like, I'm metal, so I'll be able to survive this.
So it starts out, and this Iron Man falls off a cliff, it seems, or jumps off a cliff, and then like smashes into a bunch of pieces, and then slowly there's basically the rest of the chapter is it reassembling itself. The hands find the eyes and carry the eyes to the arm, and this and then like kind of reconstitutes. And then the second chapter is about this farm where they're hearing about this Iron Man.
Which, by the way, Hogarth is the name of the child, or at least Hogarth's son. I can't remember. Is it actually?
I think
Hogarth?
it was the child. Yeah.
Okay.
And this child is a hunter, is trying to trap foxes, and then eventually realizes that he could try to trap this Iron Man, and then does, and gets him buried in the soil because they had dug out this giant.
Yeah. So it's like the whole
hole.
Town has come together now, and they're like, we're going to capture this entity. Yeah, and they do. But then, they end up needing his help. They do also feed it a scrapyard, basically. Send it to a scrapyard where it can eat, because it's eating tractors and stuff, something that gets directly in the movie. The scrapyard's in the movie. So certain elements do carry over. The lamp, the eyes looking like headlights and like big lamp eyes and stuff, that gets talked about a lot, and that is definitely a thing from the movie as well.
And then he kind of becomes like a part of the town. Like people are just like, he just starts hanging out, and people are cool with it for a while. And then this like larger threat shows up, which is this dragon, whatever the hell, angel god thing, and lays all over Australia, challenges everybody, basically says, feed me people, or feed me organic matter,
living things. Yeah.
Feed me living things, or I'll take them from you.
Yeah.
So people are like, no, we got to send our armies. They send their armies. The armies can't do anything, and then eventually the Iron Man hears about this, and he like kind of,
I think Hogarth goes to him and says like, we need your help, like, can you help us against this? Yeah. And he comes up with this plan.
And I saw him like in this moment as like the Iron Man had become like an old man in Britain. Like he's like kind of like hanging out and like drinking tea or drinking oil, I guess, or whatever you would do.
Eating steel, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of comes to like that life, it seems, but then he's willing to help out the people who've been feeding him.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a heroic moment. He's like, all right, I'm gonna help out humanity, because they gave me this scrapyard they're letting me stay here, so I'm going to return the favor by helping them out.
And then that runs directly into what you were talking about, this battle of where they try to see who can withstand the heat of an oil fire or the sun, and then ultimately he outlasts this entity. And the deal was that he would become the servant of the Iron Man.
Slave is the word that's used.
Okay.
I'll become your slave.
Yeah.
Okay. So he tells him, okay, well, what you're going to do is leave humanity, do only something in service of humanity. And then the thing that ends up being agreed upon is that he's going to like fly around,
hides behind the moon basically, and then is singing a song, because then
it's the Song of the Spheres.
Mm-hmm. It's revealed that that's like his primary focus, but the evil intent, or like the conflict in humanity, has drawn him there and made him kind of say like, well, why wouldn't I do this? Like kind of, I don't know, some selfishness or something that like is inherent to humanity. And
I guess the implication is that like the conflicting nature of humanity, like, created the conflict in this entity as well, and like if it wasn't there, it would have been a peaceful entity and just sung the song. So that's what it returns to doing, and then in return it sings this like soothing song, and it like soothes all of humanity, and humanity finds like a lasting peace,
which seems a bit religious, kind of Deus Ex Machina kind of ending, where it's just like, and then God makes everything better, and you guys you live this great life. But
it's God who you beat, who's threatening to eat you. You beat him in a contest of wits and strength, and then now,
something forces everyone in the world to be peaceful. So I don't know. Supposed to be a happy ending. Seems a little convoluted, but
okay. So let's set this aside. I think we're good. We've talked about what it is. We're going to talk about Ted Hughes now. Then we can talk about a little bit about if that informs how we feel about this book, and then we can move into the movie. But there's a decent amount to get into with Ted Hughes here. So Ted Hughes, I knew nothing about, and I was like, I'm just going to research a little bit about this guy's bio, not expecting to find a whole lot, assuming this was the thing he was most well known for. I was wrong. Ted Hughes.
Yeah, I know nothing about this person.
Okay. So Ted Hughes is actually named Edward James Hughes. He was born in 1930 and would die in 1998. He was an English poet, translator, and children's writer. Critics frequently rank him as one of the best poets of his generation and one of the 20th century's greatest writers. He was appointed the Poet Laureate in 1984 and held that office until his death. In 2008, The Times ranked Hughes fourth on its list of 50 greatest British writers since 1945. So, big deal writer in his own right, for his poetry specifically. The children's writings were kind of a footnote in this. Like, it's like, yeah, he wrote some children's books. One of them happened to get made into this movie. But he's really not known for that. So he was this like handsome, mysterious figure who was beloved by British society. He was famous pretty early on. He was someone who was obsessed with Shakespeare, which is funny considering what we just covered. And when I say obsessed, I mean like literally obsessed. So like he went and did this national service for 2 years. And while he was there, he was stationed as a ground wireless mechanic in the RAF in an isolated 3-man station in East Yorkshire. During his time, he had little to do but read and reread Shakespeare and watch the grass grow. He learned many of the plays by heart and memorized great quantities of Yeats's poetry as well. So he was famous for this. Like he would read Shakespeare like daily and memorized like his entire body of work at some point.
I wonder how he felt about Taming of the Shrew.
Yeah, curious to know. All right, let's just get into it. So in 1956, Hughes and his friends hold a party to launch St. Boltos Review, which had a single issue. This is some sort of magazine that he launched. In it, Hughes would have 4 poems. At the party, he met American poet Sylvia Plath, who was studying at Cambridge on a Fulbright scholarship. She had already published extensively, having won various awards, and had come to the party especially to meet Hughes and his fellow poet Lucas Myers. So Hughes and Plath felt an immediate mutual attraction, but they did not meet again for another month when Plath would pass through London on her way to Paris. And she continued to visit him again like 3 weeks later. Anyway, so what this did is it kicked off a very quick romance. Hughes and Plath were married 4 months after meeting. So Plath is a whole figure that we obviously could do an entire episode on. We don't have time to do. But I think a lot of people kind of know her story, right? Like
I've heard of Sylvia Plath, and I think I know that she died, right?
Yeah.
Like young?
Famously killed herself.
Oh, okay, that's what it was.
So it was a up-and-coming young woman poet in this era who was captivating, wrote feminist works, was very sort of new in her career, but was struggling with depression. She had already attempted suicide several times by the time she met Ted Hughes. But he claims that he didn't really know about a lot of that. She seemed happy when they were together. So that year they would return to Cambridge, and they had many poems published in the Nation, Poetry, and the Atlantic. Plath would type up Hughes's manuscript for his collection Hawk in the Rain, which won the competition run by the Poetry Center of the Young Men's and Young Women's Hebrew Association of New York. The first prize was publication by Harper. Hughes gained widespread critical acclaim after the book's release in September of 1957. So she typed up his manuscript that got him this wide acclaim. And they became kind of like the it couple in poetry circles, right? Like these were two, like he was already he was kind of known for pastoral writing. He would talk a lot about nature and the natural world. I don't know. I wanted to compare him a little bit to Frost, but I don't know if that's accurate. I think their language might have been quite different, but this is a poet. I'd never read any of his poetry, but it seems like he was really someone like that. The couple would then move to the United States in 1957 so that Plath could take a teaching position at Smith College. During this time, Hughes would teach at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. In 1959, they would return to London. They were both writing. Hughes was working on programs for the BBC, as well as producing essays, articles, reviews, and talks. During this time, he wrote the poems that would later be published in Recklings and Wadwu. Hughes and Plath would have 2 children, Frida Hughes, born in 1960, and Nicholas Hughes, who was born in 1962. In 1961, they bought the house Court Green in North Totton, Devon. So, in the summer of 1962, Hughes would begin an affair with a woman named Assia Wevel. She was someone who escaped from the Nazis in World War II, and I believe of Jewish descent. She had been subletting the house with her husband, so she was married at the time. Plath found out about it, and they would separate in the autumn of that year. Plath moved back to London and set up a life in a new flat with their children. Beset by depression that was seemingly made worse by her husband's affair, and with a history of suicide attempts, Plath would take her own life in February 11th of 1963. She famously did so by opening up the oven, which had gas. It was a gas oven, and just like let the gas fill the room. And her kids were like nearby, like not in the room, but like next door when she did this. But they were young children.
They also could have died though.
I don't.
House filled up.
Unclear like how close they were. They might have been at the house next door.
That's still, I mean, super fucked up. Really sad.
Yeah. Very sad. Tragic, right? Her second collection of poetry would be published posthumously. I think maybe even The Bell Jar might have come out after her death. So a lot of her most famous writings would come out after her death. And she became this immensely popular figure in like new wave feminism. A lot of people loved her stuff. And it like her mental state and her struggles with depression are on full display in those works. And are beloved by people to this day. Now, the controversy comes in. A lot of people said Ted Hughes drove her to suicide with his affair, right? I think understandably. And Ted Hughes, because he was her husband, was the executor of her estate. And so because of that, he was able to have editorial control over her collections and her books that would come out. And he was widely criticized by people who thought that he had modified the order in which the poems were supposed to be included and even omitted some of them that people theorized made him look bad, that called into question that. So he was already, like, a lot of people were sort of blaming him for what had happened. So a month after her suicide, Hughes would write to Sylvia Plath's mother, and he would say, quote, "I don't want to ever be forgiven. I don't mean that I shall become a public shrine of mourning or remorse, but if there is an eternity, I am damned in it. Sylvia was one of the greatest, truest spirits alive, and in her last months, she became a great poet. So I think that shows maybe some guiltiness going on here, right? But this was something he actually didn't talk about a ton. He tried, a lot of this stuff came out over the course of his life, and we'll talk about some things that came out. But he didn't like address a lot of this, which led to a lot of speculation and led to a lot of backlash. And in fact, Sylvia Plath's headstone, I believe, was listed her as Sylvia Plath Hughes, and people would chisel off Hughes from the end of it, to sort of distance her from him.
Wow.
There were a lot of lawsuits that came out over this. There were radical feminists who wanted to kill Hughes in Plath's name. Now, fuel for this fire, I think, is added in 2017, so pretty recently. I guess 8 years ago now. 2017. There are letters published. Now, some people have questions about their authenticity, but supposedly authentic letters written from Sylvia Plath to her then therapist or psychiatrist, in which she details Ted supposedly physically abusing her, leading her to have a miscarriage. Ted Hughes' widow, because after he died, she would come out and say that she doesn't believe any of this and thinks that it's all fiction. But this has, in recent years, given a lot of credence to a lot of this. So his whole life was marred by this, and rightfully so, I think. But also just like it was colored by this. It was something that he would eventually write about. He had this book come out as the year he died, 1998. He was facing like a serious terminal illness, and he puts out this book where he actually writes a bunch of poems addressed to Sylvia Plath, essentially. I don't know if they're like specifically are, but a lot of them are these like letters to her. And I don't have time to like dive into like what they all mean. Obviously it's poetry, so it's really deeply like, symbolic, and you have to kind of suss it out. But I don't know. It seems like he feels a lot of guilt about it, probably has a lot of things he regrets. Oh, the other thing we didn't even talk about. So the woman he had an affair with. On March 23rd of 1969, 6 years after Plath's suicide, Assia Wevel would take her own life by the same method. So asphyxiation from a gas stove. But Wevel would also kill their child, Alexandra Tatiana Elise, the 4-year-old daughter of Hughes. So,
Christ,
yeah.
Dude, that's insane.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, there's some.
And she supposedly was also haunted by what had happened with Sylvia Plath. And people point to that as a particular clue in the fact that she, took her life in the same way. I
mean, it sounds like there's a possibility of abuse. Regardless, there was cheating, there was like clear depression, like whether he physically did it or not, there's obviously guilt. You would have guilt if anyone would have guilt if their spouse, committed suicide. But like this seems like very particular. It sounds like there's a lot of evidence for the case. I know it sounds like people have wanted to prove that for a long time. But then then the woman that he had an affair with also doing the same thing. That's pretty symbolic, and like maybe she's showing her guilt there. Or also maybe some people will say, well, the same thing happened twice to each of the women he was with. So yeah, is he like directly involved in some way? Like, holy shit.
Now, I don't think there's any like sense that he murdered them, but clearly something's going on here.
Push them to it, yeah.
Maybe.
Possibly, I don't know.
Now, during all of this, we're talking about the Iron Man. The only thing I could find about this, because he wrote all these books, one is called The Crow, or just Crow, that ended up being his most famous work. But he writes The Iron Man directly after the suicide of Sylvia Plath, and he writes it for his children. He said in an attempt to help them be able to cope with and move on from their mother's suicide. Wild stuff. There's even more I could get into, like his obsession with Shakespeare. He worked on this like collection that took him like 10 years to write. It was his conviction that he wanted to unlock the secret of Shakespeare's work, that he would reconcile the war inside himself in the aftermath of Plath's suicide. I was fiercely bitten by the hypothesis bug, he wrote, and could not do it. This bug, eventually a full-blown fever, was Hughes's belief that through 14 plays culminating in The Tempest, Shakespeare was hammering a great equation in which the playwright presented the mystery of himself to himself. Most poets, Hughes declared, never came anywhere near divining the master plan of the whole makeup. If he followed Shakespeare, perhaps he could achieve a psychic reconciliation. So he became obsessed with this idea that there was like a grand plan or like message behind all of Shakespeare's work. And he tried to write this book in which he like unified them and like laid out this stuff. And the book was panned. Like critics were like, this is terrible. This is nothing. We don't like this at all. Right. And like, it was, he said that he almost died writing this book. He's like, it's like one of his biggest regrets. He's like, Shakespeare, my obsession with Shakespeare almost killed me, basically.
I think that he was off the deep end at that point.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. Yeah, wild. I never would have thought that just based on this story. And I mean, it's really sad that this story was written kind of to the children after Sylvia Plath's death.
I had no idea, right? Like the Iron Man. Who would have thought? And that which now would later become the Iron Giant. And like the Iron Giant's pretty different, which let's move into that because we've spent a lot of time on this. But I just want to like, it's crazy the stuff that you'll find out sometimes when you're doing research, because I really just thought this was some guy who was most known for this work and he wasn't going to have much else about him. And I found out all this stuff and like, this is literally Sylvia Plath's husband, and she committed suicide famously,
because
possibly because of him having an affair.
Yeah, and not to mention, you said at the beginning, like he was also like one of the greatest poets of his generation. People were saying.
Oh yeah, and still like so like a lot of this stuff came, like I said, 2017. A lot of this stuff came out later. Like he was beloved. Like there's foundations dedicated to him. There's like festivals. Like he's considered one of the most famous poets in England, and like I don't know what his legacy is now, how much of it is tarnished or not. I think there is still a lot of debate about like how culpable he is for any of this. But definitely one of the like most tragic romances and couples and like all of literature, I would say.
The Iron Man would become the Iron Giant in the US. I think,
which by the way, it was changed because of Iron Man.
Of course,
the comics. They were like, this comic character is becoming quite popular, so we can't have a book called Iron Man.
So the Iron Giant is directed by Brad Bird. Brad Bird, we've actually talked about Brad Bird a little bit.
Okay. Name sounds familiar.
Famous for kind of being a part of the Cal Arts scene, the Cal Arts University. A lot of the Pixar, kind of that generation of animators. I think Tim Burton was someone. I think that's how this has all come about in the past. Is like Tim Burton was also a part of that kind of cohort, and it's just like a group of people who were at the kind of the cutting edge of new technology with animation, and also.
So is that like Henry Selick as well?
I think so, yeah. Henry Selick would have been involved in there. But it's like they're also like looking back at like the Walt Disney golden era of like, the 40s and 50s, and some of those animators are still around teaching classes at places like Cal Arts, and then this generation is picking it up and running with it.
Okay.
So of course like the lineage of animation is like on display here. And I mean Brad Bird talks extensively about like a lot of his influences, and there's a really famous group called Disney's 9 Old Men, which were like kind of created the hallmarks of what you could expect in a Disney film, which would then of course like influence all animators beyond that in America and beyond. Yeah, I mean this is his directorial debut. Let's talk a little bit about how this film was brought into development.
Yeah.
I guess I'll give you an opportunity first though to general thoughts. What do you think about this film?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean like because it was my first time watching. I knew the rough shape of this story. I knew that there was some sort of a sacrificial act at the end. I knew that it was about the Iron Giant not wanting to be a weapon. Like these were all things I knew just from cultural osmosis, hearing this referenced in other places. But I didn't know a lot of the details. So a lot of it was quite charming. I found Hogarth to be a relatable character who is growing up in sort of an idyllic 50s era town, running around in the woods, getting into hijinks. And this was the kind of thing that I recognize I would have really loved as a kid, had I seen it. And then the Iron Giant himself, voiced by Vin Diesel, is, huge and
I was wondering if you picked up on that.
Yeah, and I saw Jennifer Aniston is also the mom. Some notable voice actors here, but he is endearing. They have fun together. A lot of the stuff from the story is brought over, but the story itself is quickly seated in a tale about determination and like, are you what people say you are, or are you able to determine for yourself what you are, and should you care about what other people say you are? And you get to choose for yourself what you are. And that becomes the message of the movie, which is a message I think people can all recognize and appreciate. And it becomes, particularly notable because we find out that the Iron Giant is a weapon, essentially. And it seems like maybe getting hit on the head is what has made him forget.
Possibly, yeah.
But he even says, like, I'm not a gun. So specifically, it's like, I'm not a gun. I'm trying to be something other than a gun. And the conflict becomes more with the U.S. military, as represented by this character, what's his name, like Kent Manley, something like that, Mr. Manley, which is a hilarious name for this character to have. And he's this, he's a villain. He's pretty terrible, but he's trying to investigate all of this. And at one point, he tries to nuke an entire town. And in a moment that I thought was like strangely reminiscent of what actual Iron Man does, spoilers for Avengers, flies up and takes the nuke himself to save the town. And I was like, holy shit, this is the end of Avengers, but it's here at Iron Man, which came first. So does Avengers owe credit to this? I don't know.
Probably, yeah. Joss Whedon, I'm sure, plucked that and was like, yeah, this is the thing. I'm just curious, like, as a modern viewer, though, like, you said that you might like it when you're younger. What, like, how did you feel about it? Because I
still liked it. Like I said, this is a it's kind of like I don't know what a good comparison is, but like, this is a topic I have thought about so much in my own work. Like, I love this topic. I love talking about technology and how it is this double-sided thing, and how it has the potential to improve our lives so much, but also the potential to destroy us. It's well-trodden thing in all of sci-fi, but I particularly love it. And I love the idea of like trying to understand what is intelligence, what is artificial intelligence, and what would it even mean for someone to be truly sentient, and what would it mean to have the ability to think and feel and have morality if you're an artificial being, and all this stuff. And like, I am so like far down the rabbit hole in all of these topics that this felt sort of quaint in a way. Like it was very like kind of broad strokes, but I think it's a great way to introduce like young people to these ideas. And I appreciate it for that reason. And again, I was just so familiar with a lot of what was going to happen that there wasn't a lot of surprise for me there. So I liked it. I don't think it could ever have the same effect on me that it would have had I seen it when I was like 12 years old.
I'm going to give my perspective as the guy who saw it when he was 12 years old. I absolutely love this movie, and a couple of things that I'll dig into with that. I kind of figured you were going to think it was a little quaint. I really did feel that way. I was like, this is just a very simple story. But in 99, what it was doing for animated films, like you look at, like, I think the complexity of animated films and what filmmakers are trusting general audiences with these like really massive tentpole animated films that became the norm from Disney Animation Studio and then into Pixar. You think of like an Inside Out and like what Inside Out is doing, and like how like there's like a lot of complex threads of like humanity and like emotions and like what all that means within each individual. Like that owes so much to a story like this. And really, this feels like an early Pixar movie to me when I watch the Iron Giant. You're going to hear me talk about it in those terms as well, because this is genuinely like maybe one of the most influential animated films ever, especially with like the tie to Brad Bird. And I mean, you will find it endlessly in lists of not even just like the greatest animated films of all time, but like some of the greatest films of all time. And I did find that I've seen this movie 10 times maybe.
Wow.
And I found myself getting emotional watching it this time.
Yeah.
I really did. I'm getting misty eyed when the Iron Giant is making that sacrifice in that play, because while it is like such a simple story, it's playing on those elements of like, it's a Frankenstein story, right? It's like the Frankenstein monster is created for a reason and then doesn't want to be the creature. It doesn't want to be what the monster that everyone sees it as.
Yes. It's
powerful. And the way that it's framed with this child character, like kind of teaching him along the way, it's so charming. I love this film, and I'm shocked. I was kind of shocked that it still affected me in the same way. And I did wonder. I was like, I wonder if this is nostalgia for me. I wonder if Luke's going to get the same play out of this.
I want to, for the record, I did really enjoy this movie. like I want to say I love it, but I just like I feel like I would have loved it had I seen it at that age. And for now, like I'm like, this is what I expected it to be after all of its like hype and like what I've heard so much about this movie. And when I watched it, I was like, yeah, this is what I kind of was expecting. I don't know. It's like I don't want to sound like I didn't like it because I definitely did. It didn't have a lot there that I was necessarily surprised by, and whether or not that I feel like that's my own shit I'm bringing to it, right? Like it's just my own very subjective place.
I thought you were gonna like it. I realized that like it was like so many people have picked the baton up from here and run with it and done so much more with these kind of topics and these kind of like this kind of what you can do in an animated film. I'm very
glad I filled in this gap. Like I like the shape of it was already there. So, but I finally actually watched the thing now. I'm very glad I did that.
Cool. Yeah. Let's talk. So I'm going to tell a little bit more about Brad Bird and then how this came about because it's got a really interesting background to it. Philip Bradley Bird is an American filmmaker, animator, and voice actor. He has had a career spanning over 4 decades in both animation and live action. Bird was born in Montana and grew up in Oregon. He developed an interest in the art of animation early on and completed his first short subject by age 14. Bird sent the film to Walt Disney Productions, leading to an apprenticeship for the studio's 9 Old Men, which I talked to them about them a little bit ago. He attended the California Institute of the Arts in the late 1970s and worked for Disney shortly thereafter. In the 1980s, he worked in film development with various studios. He wrote the screenplay for Batteries Not Included in 87 and developed 2 episodes of Amazing Stories for Steven Spielberg, including its spin-off based on a segment written by Bird for the show, the widely panned animated sitcom Family Dog. Afterwards, Bird joined The Simpsons as creative consultant for 8 seasons. He directed the traditional animated feature The Iron Giant, which I would argue it's not quite traditionally animated because there's an element of CG. And I think this is the first animated film to feature a CG character as like a main character.
Interesting.
So really early on in that.
The robot.
The robot.
Yeah. And actually, I just wanted to go to say, like, usually I'm not someone who loves this, but I feel like it kind of works here.
I agree.
Specifically because we're talking about a giant animatronic being to where the sort of uncanniness of that works, and sometimes it doesn't in other things I've seen it in.
And I think as time went on, the technology got better for CG to where they could do way more dynamic things that look way more juxtaposed to traditional animation. Like this was still a time where they were using the tools of traditional animation with some CG elements.
Yeah.
And like I think it looks
so
pretty
lighter
good. There's
touch
also,
in some way.
Yeah, I think there's also there's an attempt to like. I read that they were using like a blurred line technique along the edges of it, so that it would kind of look imperfect in the way that hand-drawn animation can.
Okay, maybe that's helping us somewhat then too.
The Iron Giant, though critically lauded, it was a box office bomb. He moved to Pixar, where he wrote and directed 2 computer-animated films, The Incredibles and Ratatouille, that were worldwide critical and financial smash hits that earned Bird 2 Academy Awards for Best Animated Feature wins and Best Original Screenplay nominations. He then transitioned to live-action filmmaking with similar success, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol in 2011, and then he directed Disney's Tomorrowland in 2015, which that was a pretty massive bomb, I'm pretty sure. But Tomorrowland is an interesting like callback and reference to some of his mentors, some of the 9 Old Men animators. They had like a Tomorrowland story that was out there, and then he picked it up, and he actually
that was like a thing at Disney, right? A place called Tomorrowland.
It still is. It's
still there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's on the TV at one point. There's a commercial that pops up. We watched the specialized version, I think it was called.
Yeah, supposedly it added like 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, and one of the things that was changed is like the things that were shown on TV. One of the things he added in later was something about Tomorrowland. So that's shown on one of the TVs.
Okay.
He returned to Pixar to develop The Incredibles 2 in 2018, which became the second highest grossing animated film of all time during its theatrical run and earned him another nomination for the Academy Award.
I've never seen any of the Incredibles movies. I know that's one that a lot of people love. There's a lot of animated movies I haven't seen.
That came kind of a little bit pre the superhero boom that we've been in for the last like 10, 15 years. And like it was doing so much like referencing of like old comics, which like Brad Bird is clearly a fan of, and you're seeing that in this film as well with Superman. And like The Incredibles was such a good, like, it's one of the best superhero movies ever, and then it's just like superhero movies got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's like the thing for a very long time.
And that's kind of the reason I haven't seen it, because it's superheroes and I've just got a little bit of superhero fatigue. And I just missed it when it originally came out. Yeah, I missed it when it came out.
2004 though. That's like the time to
I will say I've seen Ratatouille. Ratatouille's great. I love that movie.
Ratatouille might be one of the best Pixar movies ever made.
I love WALL-E, but I also
Wall-E's
love
great.
Ratatouille. Yeah.
WALL-E's great. I love Ratatouille. Film, animation specifically, and food culture, and like the way that those two that just hit me so squarely, and it's such a fun story. And like it's not like
to rewatch that. Yeah.
It's great. Bird has a reputation for supervising his projects to a high degree of detail. He advocates for creative freedom and the possibilities of animation, and has criticized its stereotype as children's entertainment or classification as a genre rather than an art.
That's something we've talked about a lot.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're full on. This is just a mode of storytelling.
100%. Yeah. And people will, because you'll get every type of film could be also shown as an animated film.
Absolutely. And, it's really more of a medium than anything else. Yeah.
I think general audiences are coming around to that. I think that the animation, what we're seeing, especially like Japanese animation for like 10, 15, 20 years, has been helping that. And it's definitely like younger and younger people are getting introduced to that. And you're seeing things like Arcane, and you're seeing things like...
and adults are following it more and more too. So
exactly. Yeah. And it's like our generation that grew up with that. Right. I was always like, animation has some of the best films. And you know, it's great to see that it's starting to be seen in the same light, but we're still on the fringe of that. I would say you and I are in like championing that. Like it's like a no-brainer for us, but it's not for everyone. It's not for general audiences.
Yeah, I feel like we tried to cover like one or more animated movies every year.
So this film was being developed. The origins lie obviously from the Iron Man that we read. But then in the 1980s, rock musician Pete Townsend chose to adapt the book for a concept album. It was released as The Iron Man, a musical in 1989, and that's Pete Townsend of The Who fame. In 1991, Richard Basley, who later became the film's lead animator, pitched a version of The Iron Man to Don Bluth while working at his studio in Ireland. He created a story outline and character designs, but Bluth passed on the project. In 1996, while developing the project on its way through, the studio saw the film as a perfect vehicle for Brad Bird, who at the time was working for Turner Feature Animation, developing Ray Gun. Which I read is actually like what he's currently that may be one of his upcoming films, this Ray Gun. Okay. So it's been in the works since 96, it seems.
Wow.
Yeah, not sure. I don't know much about that one, but I did see that that's upcoming. Turner Broadcasting had recently merged with Warner Brothers' parent company, Time Warner, and Bird was allowed to transfer to the Warner Brothers Animation Studio to direct The Iron Giant. After reading the original Iron Man book by Hughes, Bird was impressed with the mythology of the story, and in addition was given an unusual amount of creative control by Warner Brothers. This creative control involved introducing two new characters not present in the original book, Dean and Kent, setting the film in America and disregarding Townsend's musical ambitions, who did not care either way, reportedly remarking, "Well, whatever, I got paid." Bird would expand upon his desire to set the film in America in the 50s in a later interview. The main setting looks Norman Rockwell idyllic on the outside, but inside, everything is just about to boil over. Everyone was scared of the bomb, the Russians, Sputnik, even rock and roll. This clenched Ward Cleaver smile masking fear, which is really what the Kent character was all about. It was the perfect environment to drop a 50-foot-tall robot into. And that's something about sci-fi that, like, typically some of these paranoias manifest themselves as like a Godzilla.
Right. We deal in a lot of speculative metaphors. This reminded me so much of Fallout. I think Fallout plays a lot on these same anxieties. There's a reason that Fallout looks the way that it does, with this sort of retro vibe, set in the same time period. And we even get an extended sequence where Hogarth is in school and they're playing this informational cartoon about like hide under your desk if a bomb drops, which is something they really did show and like affected everybody who grew up in that time period, which I'm sure a lot of people making this film grew up in this time period. I
watching that scene again realized that, like, when I think of my idea of those videos that were shown to kids, this scene plays through my mind from this film.
Wow.
Like that specific one.
There was in real, because like I watched a documentary literally talking about like Fallout and like why they did it the way they did it, but these were real things that they would show, and they were so surreal because the people in them were actors who were like instructed to like smile the whole time because the whole point was for it not to be frightening. And they're talking about crazy stuff like nuclear holocaust and like atomic bombs going off like nearby, and they're like, this is what you do, and like we're all happy while we're doing it and everybody's safe, and it's trying to like lessen fear, but it had this bizarre effect on everybody who saw it where you kind of can see through it, and that's why Pip-Boy and everything in Fallout is the way that it is famously from this stuff. Yeah
and it's super dark. Like when you see it now, like I've seen some of those videos since, and it is, they're not even really embellishing that much in some of these scenarios.
It's how they were.
It's like that.
Yeah.
I did read that Hughes himself was sent a copy of the script, and he sent a letter back because he passed just before the film was finished, but he was able to check out the script. He said that he was pleased with the version. In the letter, he stated, "I want to tell you how much I like what Brad Bird has done. He's made something all of a piece with terrific sinister gathering momentum, and the ending came to me as a glorious piece of amazement. He's made a terrific dramatic situation out of the way he's developed the Iron Giant. I can't stop thinking about it."
Yeah. That's cool. I thought maybe he wouldn't have been able to know what the final product looked like, because I knew that he died before it came out, but that's cool that he got to read the script at least. Do we like him? I don't know, but clearly,
maybe he needed a win too, right? Like maybe he was like, I'm getting something adapted. Like maybe this will help my legacy because, like you said, that painted so much of his life, post her suicide.
Yeah. I don't know. People probably have opinions about Ted Hughes,
Sure.
quite strong, but I literally just found out a lot of this stuff in the last like 24 hours. So
yeah, I'm definitely going to look more into him as an individual and try to figure out.
Let us know in the comments how you feel about Ted Hughes.
Yeah. One of the major things that I mentioned there was that Warner gave a ton of creative control, and they were actually focused on a couple other films that they were developing. But I could talk more about that. So the financial failure of Warner's previous animated effort, Quest for Camelot, which I've actually referenced on this podcast before. I think I've talked to you about it. Have you seen that?
I don't know. It sounds familiar.
It's cool. It's like, it's Warner Brothers animated film from around that time, like the mid 90s, maybe 96 or so. There's like a dragon that has two heads, but they're individually thinking, and they kind of fight with each other throughout the movie. I think you would know it from that.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't sound super familiar now.
You would like it. I think, okay. Especially young Luke would probably really like it.
Sure.
But anyway, it was, I liked it. I don't know, I haven't seen it in a very long time, but it was a financial failure. It made the studio reconsider animated films, helped shape this production. 3/4 of the animation team on that film helped craft the Iron Giant. So, a lot of that team came over here to work. So clearly it's not a fault of the animation team. By the time it entered production, Warner Brothers informed the staff that there would be a smaller budget as well as a time frame to get the film completed. Although the production was watched closely, Bird commented, "They did leave us alone. If we kept it in control and showed them we were producing the film responsibly and getting it done on time and doing stuff that was good." Bird regarded the trade-off as having 1/3 of the money of a Disney or DreamWorks film and half of the production schedule, but the payoff as having more creative freedom, and describing the film as fully made by the animation team. "I don't think any other studio can say that to the level that we can." So that's a massive deal. We talk all the time about studio meddling, animation notoriously, because it's such a long process to get all of it animated, and there's so many cooks in the kitchen often. And there were things that came through that they wanted to try to push into this film, but Brad Bird pushed back. And ultimately, I think this film does feel like a kind of more of a singular vision than some of the other more broadly appealing, because there's some intense moments in this film. Just the intro, like we're getting this like giant robot in the sea that this captain is having to navigate. And
God, that looked cool too. Like it looks like a meteorite coming through the clouds, and I thought that all looked like cutting edge, and I was kind of shocked that it came out in 99. So yeah, that really holds up.
The group of animators would gather in a screening room to view completed sequences, with Bird offering suggestions by drawing onto the screen with a marker. Lead animator Basley suggested this led to a sense of camaraderie among the crew, who were unified in the mission to create a good film. Bird cited his favorite moment of the film's production as occurring in the editing room, when the crew gathered to test a sequence in which the giant learns what a soul is. People in the room were spontaneously crying. It was pivotal. There was an undeniable feeling that we were really tapping into something, he recalled. Bird opted to give the film's animators portions to animate entirely rather than the standard process of animating one character in a throwback to the way Disney's first features were created. So like giving people more ownership of a certain scene, allowing them to really live in that space. And it just sounds like this was run, and I've read a book about Pixar actually, and the way that they do things. And this sounds like a model for how things would eventually be done there as well. And it's just like this very collaborative effort. But this idea of like redoing things, they had to redo some of the scenes, going back and like checking your work rather than having to fly through, which most animated films, again, that the time it's very time intensive, effort intensive to create these films, and being able to like go back in and say, is this really worth it? And as you can see, Pixar films come out maybe once every 3 to 5 years. In the past, Pixar is still doing really like fun cutting edge stuff with things like Soul and Inside Out 2 and some of those films. But there was a period of time where, I mean, everyone I knew, just the common general audiences would tell you every Pixar the movie that comes out is amazing, right? Yeah. That was the sentiment for a really long time.
For a while, yeah, that was the sort of reputation they had, yeah.
Just other things that I saw in my research about the production of this film. Bird later recalled that he clashed with executives who wished to add characters such as a sidekick dog, set the film in the present day, and include a soundtrack of hip hop. This was due to concerns that the film was not merchandisable, and maybe they were onto something there. But we continue to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a commercial failure, so hard to say for sure they were wrong, but some of that seems wrong-headed to me.
Bird responded to that. If they were interested in telling the story, they should let it be what it wants to be. So that's what he was telling some of these executives. I will also say, without going too deep into it, it's been noted by critics of the time, people who were in the media. Brad Bird himself has come out and said they did not get a proper marketing push. They absolutely were failed in marketing, and it wasn't until the film was coming out on home release that they marketed the hell out of it, made tons of money. And so
and that makes sense. Like I was around in 1999, you know what I mean? Like that was the year The Matrix came out. That was the year 10 Things I Hate About You came out. Like we just talked about this, right? Or like it was right around that time. Maybe it was 98. But like my point is like I feel like I only heard about the Iron Giant once it was out on video. Like I don't even remember the theatrical run at all.
I remember seeing trailers that like totally like just wowed me. The shots of like the giant silhouetted with like just the eyes turning on, and like coming out of the water, some of those kinds of shots. Yeah. They did make a trailer that was pretty mysterious, but I agree, like it didn't get a proper marketing push. And I've read some stuff about like they didn't get the Burger King push for the toys and all the other stuff that they wanted to. The studio nearly delayed the film by several months to better prepare because they hadn't been preparing up to that point. And part of it was that they doubted that Bird and the team could deliver when they were supposed to. And they were so efficient, they were so creative. They released this film according to budget and time and timeline, as far as I could tell. And then the studio said we should delay it and properly lead up to its release. And Bird said, "You guys have had 2.5 years to get ready for this." Press outlooks took notice of the absence of marketing, with some reporting that the studio had spent more money on marketing for the intended summer blockbuster Wild Wild West.
God, I remember that movie.
This film also opened the same weekend as The Sixth Sense. So I just want to note, like, wow, I don't think it's the film's fault that it didn't do well in the theaters necessarily. One of the things that I wanted to note, because, you know, the original source material was kind of wrapped in tragedy, I read that Brad Bird was in part interested to make this film as a memorial to his sister, Susan, who died at the hands of her estranged husband by gun violence.
Wow.
Yeah. And his pitch was this: what if a gun had a soul and it didn't want to be a gun? So he really tied that into some of like the emotion of what we see from the Iron Giant character. Yeah,
and what a pitch that is. That's incredible. And that is, I think, like the best summation of what this movie is. You know, which is a little bit different than what the original book was.
As we're going to start talking about some of like the specifics of what happened in the film, Bird opted to produce the Iron Giant in widescreen, specifically 2:39:1 CinemaScope aspect ratio, but was warned against doing so by his advisors. He felt it was appropriate to use the format as many films from the late 50s were produced in such wide screen formats. He hoped to include the CinemaScope logo on a poster, partially as a joke, but 20th Century Fox owned the trademark and refused. I just think that's fun to note because like, I think when you get into film, you start like the choice of an aspect ratio evokes a time period, or it evokes like a type of perspective you want to give the audience. And I always think it's cool to see filmmakers like thinking about all of that and the history of film baked into it.
Yeah, that's fun. It's not the kind of thing that like non-film nerds think about a lot, but yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I want to briefly talk about what I think is the heart of this version of the story and how smartly it is set up and plays out throughout. Because I think the thematic story of what you just described, a gun who has a soul who does not want to be a gun, and the larger implications of that are set up brilliantly. We've already talked about the films that are shown in school, but overall, there's a lot of this like fear of technology. There's the mad scientist cartoon that Hogarth is watching when he originally gets drawn out into the woods. There is the paranoia around that Manley character and the U.S. government in general around fear of technology, but specifically fear of technology in the hands of others. And anything that is outside of the control is something to be feared, right? This is something that continues to be important, right? It's very much a like, it's not the problem that this technology exists. It's the problem that we don't have full control over it. Often becomes the issue.
Well, that's where the paranoia was at in the 50s with Sputnik being launched by the Russians.
Yeah.
And then the U.S. was trying to race them to the moon because of that, and just to show like a dominance or a control, like you're saying.
Well, and then we had the Cold War playing out with, the arms production and the stockpiling of nuclear weapons and all that stuff, because all about just the risk of we got to have more than them became a huge issue. But we continue to see this today. This is not something that has gone away. But there's an important scene that happens towards the middle of the film, maybe back half, where a deer. There's this cool moment where the Iron Giant meets a deer, and then the deer is immediately killed, is shot by a gun. And specifically the gun's left behind, and Hogarth has this whole thing about like, you're not a gun. He says, I don't want to be a gun, and there's the whole thing about Superman versus being, I forget what the name, Atomo or something, like there was like a villain that he looked kind of like, and he's like, oh, no, you're not Atomo, you're Superman.
Giant mechanized villain kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah. And so there's this crisis of identity. And I thought this was also underscored with the scrapyard moment where Dean, in one of his like interesting quirks, is that he is also an artist. He does like scrap artistry, right? And Hogarth shows up and he's like mad for a moment that like the Iron Giant has been making scrap art, and he's like, that's not a thing that a giant robot should be doing. And Dean's like, well, what should a giant robot be doing? And I just think it's a cool thing, because it's like, that's the implication that a giant robot should be in some way like a martial construction, like designed for war, right? And not creating art, which is something you wouldn't have associated with that.
This is also a kid who, like, when we see him go out into the woods, straps on his army-looking helmet, gets a little BB gun, does a salute.
America's obsession with warfare. Yeah.
And I read in my research that there's a picture of his father who it looked like he may have been an Air Force pilot.
Yeah, you're right.
Because he has a missing father in this film, like you don't know where the father is. And I do like that the Dean character becomes a father figure and an alternative one too. I think that's an important thing about that character, is that he's like, this is the 50s, right? Like this is not a normal thing. He's very much an outsider. And so is the Iron Giant. So like it's mirrored in that way as well, right? Like the Iron Giant is learning from this boy, but also from Dean, who this boy looks up to. And this, they're kind of ostracized by society. I don't know that the Iron Giant has had an opportunity to be ostracized, but he would be, like, just on the surface.
Well, he is through the actions of Manley and the army coming after him. And then it plays out that like he really only becomes dangerous when he's attacked, right? It's just this like self-defense spiral, and that really deals a lot with like the Cold War and the whole idea of like this mutual assured destruction, and like it's like if both sides could just calm down, everything would be fine, but like they're incapable of doing that.
Paranoia.
I don't know. I just love the way that like thematically it builds the whole time, and then it crescendos in a final confrontation with the saving the town from this nuke. That is all about like nuclear power is the most quintessential version of this, right? Like it has the benefit of being extremely clean, extremely efficient, like awesome energy, and yet it's dangerous if mishandled in some ways, and then also the flip side of nuclear power is nuclear weapons, which is like the most destructive force humanity's ever created. And so it's like you have both sides all caught up within this one technology. And if you look at the Iron Giant as sort of a metaphor for nuclear power, you can also see that playing out, right? Of like, are you a hero or are you a villain? And wants to be a hero in this case.
And I do think it's interesting to note that it seems to me that the Iron Giant in this case is an alien robot, because we see a vision, a dream that he has, which I think that is some of the added material, by the way, from this.
Oh, okay, that dream. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that it had a dream.
Yeah, had a dream, and it's kind of transmitted to the TV. It seems like Dean saw part of that dream.
Yeah,
and there's like but there's multiple Iron Giants just kind of like raising planets.
They were
like
attacking
destroying
a planet.
planets.
Yeah, it looked like it. Yeah.
So kind of an alien, not even like a international threat.
That's interesting because I took that as the moment that the Iron Giant realizes that he is a gun, but then it's like choosing to reject that. But like that dream is like more of like a memory almost. Because I wasn't sure at first, but then it was sort of confirmed by the way he transforms. That was all fairly true.
He falls to the earth at the beginning of the film too, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, his nature is completely unknown. That is what confirmed to me that he is a weapon. And I thought you could have read that as, like, him having a nightmare about what he might be. But when he turns into exactly that in the fight, it seems to be confirmed that is what his, like, nature originally was. But then that's still interesting then because it's a story about turning against that nature. Which, very cool. Very, very, this is the kind of movie that I absolutely would show a kid. I think this is excellent stuff.
I've been a massive comic fan my entire life. Like outside of the superhero boom, seeing a character like the Iron Giant and the way that the kid is so innocent and sees the Iron Giant not as a threat, and says, no, you're not this Atomo guy or whatever. You're Superman. And the way that what Superman represents, and I know that it's been like people think Superman's lame and stuff, but like the purest form of Superman is like a goal for humanity to go for, the pure good, and the sacrifice play, and like all of those things like play into what we get here with the Iron Giant. And I love that he like quickly picks up and looks up to a Superman like figure. Superman, there's plenty of Superman stories where people are like, he's dangerous, he needs to be controlled. There's Superman stories where he falls to earth and Kent and Martha don't find him. It's someone, the Russians find him and they turn him into a Russian asset and all of those kinds of things, right? Like there's just there like Superman as an idea being used for this is so cool, especially in 99 when we're just it's like the Reeves films are what most people were familiar with Superman. I also wanted to say, like, so much of this film, I do love how it looks. I mentioned before, like the shadows. I love like when he's searching in the woods, and that's an intense sequence for a child. He's searching in the woods for something that he doesn't know that's knocked out his antenna at the beginning of the film, and he comes upon this giant, like completely massive robot that all he can see is its eyes, and it's chasing him. And the way that like the danger of him is played up, especially in that first scene that we've already talked about too, the ocean scene where it's like the captain thinks he's a lighthouse. Yeah. Turns out it's a giant robot. And then the playfulness and the funniness and the charm of the film throughout, where you then get to the point where this giant robot's doing cannonballs into lakes, and the entire lake flows away.
It shows it trying to, he, I guess, is trying to become something other than what it seems to be. So he we're trying to be not weapon, right? Like weapon doesn't do cannonballs, right? So trying to explore other avenues, other ways of being an artist, for example, different things that he could do.
Yeah. And you mentioned the deer scene, that it's just like a really poignant moment in the film when he realizes
the nature of death, right? Like this is the lesson about the death is a thing that exists, that Hogarth is going to experience it at some point, that things can kill other things.
Yeah. And Hogarth says like, killing is bad, but dying is normal, or something along those lines. And it's interesting that like it's a hunting scene, right, where these hunters have killed a deer. It's not like a military situation though, right? Like these hunters, I don't know. It's an interesting depiction of like violence just kind of existing for the sake of continuing on your own like survival in a sense. Like the idea of hunting is in its purest form is killing an animal and then consuming it to stay alive, right? And then like the violence that we see the other humans doing in the film, specifically the military later, is like same thing being done. Like they're doing it for their own survival. They think that they're doing it for their own survival. And then the way that the Iron Giant doesn't see any difference between the two things. It's just like death, violence, killing. It's all the same thing. And it is extremely sad though, right? It's the Bambi moment of seeing a dead deer like that and how that's going to affect and having kids confront that for the first time in their lives. Kids in the audience and Hogarth and the Iron Giant as a kid. And then that sequence that we already talked about a little bit, but where the Iron Giant's kind of just looking up into the stars and thinking about a soul and what that means.
Yeah. The soul thing is interesting to me because as someone who doesn't believe in an immaterial soul as a thing that, I don't believe exists, I still find it meaningful to think of it symbolically and to think about it in the way that it's being presented in this film is that, it is what sort of makes you a good person. It's what makes you live on, at least metaphorically, although here it's presented as sort of actually. And the idea that that the Iron Giant has a soul is presented as like what makes the Iron Giant into a person, for lack of a better term, that we empathize with, that has emotions. This is all really interesting stuff to talk about when we talk about actual artificial beings. And the existence of a soul becomes shorthand, I think, for people when they want to say whether or not they are going to connect with a robot. Just tell me it has a soul and I will. But like if you're someone like me who doesn't believe in the existence of a soul, well, now what does that mean? What is a soul then? What is the thing that I'm connecting with? And it's like we're in a children's movie, so it's not worth getting into here. But it always just like sets off in me like so many thoughts about what that actually means, and that gets into a lot of like philosophy around intelligence and around personhood and identity and all these things.
Well, and consciousness, right? Like what it means to be conscious. Yeah.
Yeah, and at what point does it qualify for our empathy, and what point should it? At what point does it? And there's not a lot of easy answers to these questions. This is why I sort of bring them up.
But I think it's obvious here to all watching the film, you're going to have empathy for the Iron Giant.
For sure.
So
this is a children's movie. Yeah. Clearly, you'll have empathy for Iron Giant, right?
But the answer is this is beyond the line. Like the line for sentience, the line for whatever humanity, whatever you think is there, soul, quote unquote, the Iron Giant has it. And so that's why like the sacrifice play, works at the end of the film.
Yeah. It makes me want to explore the more complicated questions behind this, but I love that this is like a simplified version of it that exists in a children's movie, and like I'm all for it. It makes me want to like get into because I'm such a geek for this stuff. I love talking about it and thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on a children's movie, but I digress. It's an animated film from the 1990s, so it's like I would say it's a little more simplified.
Okay, fair.
There was a sequence with a submarine, and the submarine was named the USS Nautilus.
Oh, there you go. A little 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Exactly. So we had to mention that, and obviously he's a big Disney fan. Bird is a big Disney fan, and eventually would work with Disney. And then the Day the Earth Stood Still, War of the Worlds kind of aspect of the Iron Giant as he turns into like his war mode.
Yeah.
When he thinks, specifically the thing that sets him off too is when he thinks Hogarth is dead, which again, it just plays really sweet, this relationship between these two characters. And that's what I walk away with remembering is like the sweetness, the humor. They're like kind of some of the deeper elements, but ultimately like all of those things are working really well for him.
They really smartly set this up with Hogarth, by the way, making him have a history of adopting unusual pets. And like that's like a problem he has is he adopts these things that aren't pets and he tries to make them into pets. So they perfectly set up this why he would be this way with the Iron Giant, why he would feel this pull to befriend him.
And the other thing that they perfectly set up is while the sacrifice play works really well, the Iron Giant can pull himself back together. And at the end of the film, we get the scene of the only piece that the military could find was given to Hogarth, and it rolls out out the window.
I want to say I wasn't expecting this. I felt so like when I was watching the scene, it felt like okay, we're getting some other beat. So like I knew something like this was coming as I was watching it. But when we're talking about like what I've heard about this movie, I was under the impression that fully sacrifices himself at the end and dies. Like, I thought this was a movie where the Iron Giant straight up dies.
In my memory, I thought he did too. I thought
But he
dead.
doesn't. He's alive at the end.
That makes him even more like a superhero figure.
Yeah,
specifically Superman.
I don't know. I personally I don't know if I love that choice. Like,
it undercuts the play.
It undercuts a little bit the fact that he's okay at the end, that he's going to rebuild himself.
Yeah. I heard the screenwriters talk about the survival, the fact that that scene kind of displays that you think he's still alive. I think he's alive. But he said, "quote You can't kill you can't kill E.T. and not bring him back." In the sequence where like E.T. is dead in the river or whatever, and then they shock him back, they bring him back to life. I think
it more solidly lands this in the movie made for kids.
Sure.
Because it is a little bit more of an adult story, because it's sadder if he's not still alive at the end. It's interesting that I feel like its reputation is that Iron Giant dies at the end.
I think the memory is that he does die.
Yeah.
Like, most people think that he dies, and I'm gonna forget that he doesn't. Again, like 10 years down the line, I'm like, man, the sacrifice that the Iron Giant makes for little Hogarth in that town in Maine. Never forget.
Never forget. All right, man. So I think we have got to come down on whether or not we liked the book or the movie better. For me, this is an easy one. I'm going to go with the film. I think it's thematically way more interesting. I found the actual writing of the book to be not quite to my taste. And I found the overall fairy tale nature of it to just be kind of less interesting than the version that we get in the movie. And then, the whole journey going on with learning about Ted Hughes was definitely interesting. I'm glad I know about him now. But didn't do anything to make me take the book here in this situation. I think the movie's definitely better.
Yeah. I think just seeing the legacy of the film, seeing what Brad Bird was doing, cutting edge animation, having animation be taken seriously, allowing him to be a champion for that, and everyone involved. And the fact that, like, this is a ragtag group of animators that put together a film that was kind of underlooked, not marketed well, has gone on to have the legacy that it has. It's very in keeping, I think, with like the messaging in the film, in a sense. Like, the man wants to keep the Iron Giant down, right?
Yeah.
I think that the film wasn't set up for success, and ultimately, like, they came out on the other side being one of the most notable and influential animated films.
We didn't even talk about this, but like the core messaging here, beyond the AI stuff, is one of anti-gun violence.
Yeah, and anti-war.
And anti-war. And those are topics that are very taboo in American culture. This is a culture where we fucking love our guns. And I say we in the sense of America. I am an American, grew up surrounded by gun culture. And I can see, like, it being something that, like, the American public just doesn't quite connect with, because we don't want our guns to be criticized. We don't want our guns to have souls. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying broadly. Of course, there's a subset of American culture who very much wants this.
Of course, yeah, gun reform and like gun control for sure. But the specifically what I'm saying is it's so wrapped in that 1950s nostalgia for those types of people, though. It's a Trojan horse of anti-war and anti-gun, right? Like, it's got like all the hallmarks of that the good old days, and
I think that's certainly
Americana.
what makes it good. I was touching in on the more why it was a box office failure.
I see.
You know what I mean? Like, why it didn't land as solidly with people. But you're absolutely outlining reasons why it's a good movie. And I agree with you.
And so I'm taking the film in this case. I got some out of the short story, but here with this film, I just think that it's kind of revolutionary for the time period, and I still think I regard this as I don't know if I put it in some of the pantheon of like some of Miyazaki's greatest works. I think that it's like maybe approaching that, but I do appreciate that it was doing some of the same things that Miyazaki may have been doing. Maybe it was even influenced by him in some way.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. We've already hinted at and maybe perhaps spoiled what our next project is, but we will touch on that fully at the end of this episode, so stick around for the very end. If you enjoyed our coverage of the Iron Giant and Ted Hughes and the Iron Man and all of that, let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts on this movie. Let us know if you've even read the book. I'm definitely curious to hear from people.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. We are all over the place. All of those at Ink to Film.
And if you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/inktofilm. We take suggestions from our patrons over there for future projects to do. So if there's anything that you want to hear us cover, that's a great place to let us know. And then also we have bonus episodes that come out every month on there, where we talk about other adaptations to things we've covered. We talk about sequels to adaptations, things like that. It's all over on Patreon. All right, man. So next up, we are going to be tackling Mickey 7/Mickey 17. Slightly different named here, but it's the same story. I'm going to read this book for the first time, filmed by Bong Joon-ho, who did the Snowpiercer.
And Parasite, yeah.
But for one we've covered on the podcast. Yeah. So someone I'm really a big fan of. I'm very excited to watch this movie and read this book. We'll be covering the book next week, and we hope you stick around and join us for that coverage.
Yeah, Bong Joon-ho is one of those filmmakers I'm seeing everything he comes out with. He's established that at this point. He is quite an amazing filmmaker. So I'm excited to get into that, but Mickey 7 is first. And I just saw the first trailer. I caught it before another movie I was watching, and I was like, oh, this is what we're getting into. This looks pretty cool. So I think it's going to be a good time.
All right. So that's going to be it for this week. So until next time.
Keep adapting.